Hello there again. Another little video clip on a topic that we had just last night at our coffee chat meeting here in Saskatoon. It was along the lines of a suggestion somebody had at our previous event to talk about memory, the ability to improve our memory, particularly the memory of people's names, because that can be very important to us in many settings in life. And so the idea was gone with because we didn't have another topic, and it seemed like an important topic which we had never covered yet. And at first, once again, is making the connection of how that improves the quality of our lives. Well, I think when we think about it in a way, by remembering people's names and using those names in the right way that's pleasing to them, it helps in cooperation with others, and the cooperation of others can certainly, we don't have to think very deeply to realize that the cooperation of others will help to improve the quality of our lives in our relationships especially, right? But there was quite a discussion went on, and I didn't actually do a presentation per se because the discussion was so throughout the group that I was able to just splice in little things that I meant to say, and it worked out well just like that. There was a few good ideas that came up, little tricks that people use, to help remember people's names. And one of them that was shared, I remember, was to spell the name out, like to ask the other person, how is that spelled? And to either write it out or to mentally spell it out as they're saying it. The other one is sometimes is to ask somebody, if they're not sure, especially if it's a name that's a little bit different, we're not used to it, to ask the other person how it's actually said. The pronunciation. Sometimes an A is said one way by one person and different by another person, this sort of thing, right? And there were a few other things too, which was, one of them was, there was a gentleman there, he talked about how he can always remember a face, but not necessarily a name. So if somehow there's a way of associating the look of somebody with how the name is said or in relation. Another idea was, which is quite popular here where I live in this area of the country, people have the habit of repeating one's name when talking. Like if talking to me, they'll say, so this is what I do, Steve, when I'm normally going to the store, for example. They'll fit my name into the sentence several times in those, and I think it helps them to remember the name. So there's ideas, and a lot of great ideas that were shared like that. So I'm going to go through a few little things that of note that I remember putting into the conversation as well. I think that remembering names, well, first of all, as mentioned and was concurred at our little event, that remembering people's names helps to get cooperation and like a closer relationship with people. And even if we don't get it right, another suggestion was made there. It's okay to ask somebody what their name is if we forget. We tell them, we're human beings. We make mistakes. If we ask somebody, oh, I forgot your name, most people don't mind that. It's better to be honest that way, if anything. Now, I think how this relates to a lot of the other things we were talking about before, which is this idea that we're all connected really in some way. We all are. And knowing, helping, and remembering people's names helps us with that, I think. Helps us with the experience of our connection. Because we've talked about before that logically we're connected in a way. There's no separation physically between any two people. There's no gap of substance. There's something there. There's the air and so on that connects. There's no complete void between us. We can get this logically, and we can get it intuitively too, because not only is there the physical no separation, there's also an emotional. You walk into a room and it's a very tense room. You can feel it. It's like there's an emotion there too, and there doesn't seem to be a separation. Well, in remembering people's names, it helps us to experience that more because we can experience a greater level of closeness. and the more closeness we can have, the more we experience that connection. And especially if we use somebody's name in a pleasing way. I mean, if we degrade people with their use, or make mocking statements, or nicknames that people don't like, and so on, it can actually push people away from us. But if we use names in a pleasing and an appropriate way, then it can bring that in. So it's not only just using people's names, remembering them, it's also using them in a way that is pleasing. But the question is why is it pleasing? It's one thing to say, okay, using people's names can help to draw us in. But why is that? How could that be? Well, just some thoughts of what it could be anyways. If you think about it, and we've gone through this before in another video about how if we look at our original birth certificate that was filled out at the hospital by mom or dad, usually mom, it'll say on there given names. So if we think, and that was days after we were born. So it's really our first gift, isn't it? One of our first gifts anyways, is a name. And there's lots of associations that get built up in that name from very early on. Because that name is repeated and repeated, repeated and repeated, especially the first names. And early on, especially through mother or loved ones that are close by, that name is repeated in association with a feeling of love or connection with loved ones. So when mom is there rocking us in her arms, she's repeating our name. She'll sing a song and put the name in there, and so on. So there's very deep-seated associations built up with names right from early childhood and all through those formative years. Sometimes they can be negative. Some people don't have the greatest of upbringings. So we never know when we're meeting people what the association is. So if we go with the default, that name is important somehow, to give it the most respect, and we have the greatest chance of drawing in that closeness and that cooperation. Therefore, with that deep-seated association, names are more than just an identity. And they are an identity too, because let's face it, even though we are all connected in this sort of thing, we're still living out our lives in this individual experience. We have to conduct commerce, we have to associate with one another, and if we didn't have names, how would we address each other? So we got to address each other somehow. That's one aspect of a name, just one. But the other aspects of the name are this deep-seated feeling. It has been said by somebody, I don't remember who, that one's name is generally the most significant word in somebody's life. In other words, when it's said, there's something that is like a trigger snap within. It evokes some sort of an emotion associated with the name. And being aware of this, we can become aware of it within ourselves. Just notice when name is said. Sometimes it can be said in sort of a certain tone, like maybe at work, if there's a certain boss who every time he says your name, it's not the greatest experience, because now it means another job where you've done something wrong, or what have you. Or it could be from somebody else, a loved one, and when that name is said, it's a rather soothing experience. But it's interesting to become aware of that, of an observer of that, and we can get to see how the name affects us, and we can observe that in others too, the reaction that people go through. You can see it in their eyes when their name is said. There's like a spark. It's like a trigger snap that takes place. I'm following my notes here a little bit too. Being aware of this then, observing this in ourselves and in others, helps us to become aware of this importance of using a name, and recognizing that there can be very deep-seated associative reactions that take place when we utter a name. And therefore, it becomes very important for us to be careful with names, because in a way, I mean, handle them with care, because they are, in many cases, in most cases, long-held possessions of other individuals. And just like we wouldn't go and stomp our dirty shoes in our neighbor's house, why would we be slanderous or vulgar or disrespectful of somebody's name? So it really behooves us to be very respectful of people's names, especially when we're talking all this time about improving the quality of our lives. Right? When we show respect, remember somebody's name, but not only remember it, to give it the due respect and the appropriateness of the use. And therefore we draw people in and get greater cooperation. And this helps to improve the quality of our lives. That's what I would say about names, why it's important to remember them, because if we don't remember them, we're not even starting, are we? We're not even starting on building up a relationship or tearing down, really. We're kind of left in limbo. So to remember them, to try different techniques of what works. And very often what works, for me anyways, is showing some importance for the name. Doing those sort of things that people talked about. Writing them down if possible, especially if they are odd to us. You know, like here in Canada we have people coming from all different countries, and there's not as many. Used to be there was just names like John Smith and this sort of thing, Harold McDonald and whatnot. And now there's names that are, to us, are much longer and more complicated. So it actually is a little bit more effort. But sometimes, I know what works for me is sometimes I associate the name with something common. If it sounds something similar to something else, then associate that. Like a rhyme, maybe, or an imagery of what that name sounds like, and then make a note of that, and it helps me to remember, because it's so important. Many times if we meet somebody again and we say hello and then the name, there's like that. There's more of a substance to the handshake, almost. More of a warmth to that meeting. So remembering starts the process, draws us in, is remembering them, and then using them with respect and courtesy draws us in even closer. And the more closeness we can have, the greater our sense of community and our quality of life. Because most of us anyways want to have acceptance in life. We want to feel love in a way. And names are through which we communicate with one another. So the more effective we can become at communicating through that device called a name, the better our quality of life can be, as I see it. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you again in a few weeks.